Gittin Daf Yomi Gittin, the value in design, kol המשנה ממטבע שטבעו חכמים. In the creation of an idea or of an object or of a work of art, there are two important elements. The one is the element of design and the other is the element of structure. And that applies in tangible objects as well as in intangible ideas. If you're building a bridge or you're building a building, there's structure, which is the engineering part, and there's design. What does it look like? What message is it conveying? If you look at some of the beautiful buildings in Tel Aviv and other areas, it's not just a building put up for the sake of being able to accommodate X number of people or offices. There's also a design to it. It creates a certain image. And so it is with ideas, with a piece of writing, with a lecture or a shiur. It has a structure to it, and there are design elements as well. And with understanding the difference between structure and design, we'll try and understand what appears to be a contradiction within the worldview of Rabbi Yossi. So we have in the Mishnah on the bottom of Amud Tet, Amud Bet, Katav l'shum malchut she'ena hogenet. You've got to write in a get. You put in the date, you put the place, you put the date according to the number of years of the particular king that has ruled. But if you do it incorrectly, or you do it l'shum malchut she'ena hogenet, an improper government, tetzei mizeh u'mizeh, she has to get divorced from both, u'tzricha get mizeh u'mizeh, she needs a get from it. If the get isn't written exactly correctly, that's why we're so meticulous about Gittin, and that it should only be written by Batei Din who know what they're doing, who are well versed and qualified in the area of Gittin, because it's so meticulous. And if you do it a little bit wrong, she needs a get from both of them. It's according to most, this is a midrabanan, but still the get doesn't work. And if she gets a get from one and she doesn't get a get from the first and she marries a second, havlad mamzer mizeh u'mizeh. The child can be a mamzer. Terrible things can result from a get that's not written meticulously. Ask the Gemara, my malchut she'ena hogenet, was it an improper government? Malchut haromiyim. Like the Romans, the Roman government is an improper one. Malchut she'ena hogenet. Why is it called malchut that is not proper? Mishum de'ein lahem lo ktav v'lo lashon, because it is a culture, it is a nation that doesn't have its own language. It doesn't have its own writing, it doesn't have its own language. Unlike the Greeks who have their own language and their own form of writing, the Romans didn't. They appropriated language and writing from other cultures. And the Gemara is not too complimentary about nations that appropriate cultures and language from others, because as the Sfas Emes explains in Megillah Daf Yud, the language of a nation is the essence of its soul. It's the core of that nation. And if a nation doesn't have language, it really doesn't have a soul. It really doesn't have anything at its core. So why do you have to put Malchus all together? Why do you have to mention the government in Gittin? Mishum Shalom Malchus, answers the Gemara, because we want peace with the government. Mishum Shalom Malchus tetzei v'avlad mamzer. So the Chachomim introduce a bureaucratic requirement into a get so as to enable us to have peaceful relationships with the government. And if by mistake you left it out, that makes a child a mamzer? Because of bureaucracy, you're going to create mamzerim? That doesn't make sense. Yes, says the Gemara, Rabbi Meir l'taimeh, this goes according to Rabbi Meir. Domer Rav Amnuna mashmei du'ula omer amay Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir used to say, Kol ha'meshaneh mimatbea shetavu chachamim b'gitin avlad mamzer. If anybody changes the image here as a matbea shetavu chachamim, a coin which the chachamim have minted, when the government mints a coin, you can't say, well, it's not a bad design, but I have a better design, and you change the design of the coin. That puzzles the coin. The coin is no longer accepted as legal tender. You've messed it up, even if you think your design is better than theirs. It doesn't make a difference. They've made a design. That's how it works. When the Chachomim design a get, if you change the design, havlad mamzer. That's it. It's not a get, because you've messed with the design of the Chachomim, and that's what we want to look at, this idea of messing with the design of the Chachomim. Rashi says, what is the idea of Shalom? Malchut she'elanu shalom b'mayim she'emru chashuvim anu b'eineihem shekotvim shtarotehem b'shmeinu. That the government will say, you see, the Jews really think highly of our government because they use our government's date and they mention the government in their documents, so they clearly respect our government. It shows respect for the government, and we want that to be the case. What's difficult is that in the Gemara and Brochus we have the same idea of kol ha'meshaneh mimatbea shetavu chachamim. This is a well-known phrase in the area of brachot, that if you change the design of a brocha, the brocha doesn't work. even though you've kind of got it right, but you haven't used the correct design. But that's not the view of Rabbi Meir in Gemara Brachos. A person who sees a loaf of bread and says, "What a beautiful loaf of bread! Baruch the Rebbeinu Shalom who created this loaf of bread." You say it in English. Yatsa. You see a fig and you say the same thing. Yatsa, it's good. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi Omer kol ha'meshane mimatbea shetavu chachamim bevachot lo yatsa yadei chavato. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can't mess around with the coin that has been minted by the chachamim. You can't change the design of a bracha. But there Rabbi Meir says it's okay, not serious. And in our Gemara with Gittin, Rabbi Meir all of a sudden is very worried. It's got to be exactly as the chachamim say. What is the difference between them? There's an interesting Rambam that a lot of people talk about over there, where in the one case the Rambam says in Hilchos Brachos, he says quite clearly, you can't change. Nusach kol brachot Ezra uveidinot tiknum. Ezra created the brachos. Ein ra'ui l'shanotam v'lo lo'osif al achat mehem v'lo ligroa mimena. You cannot add, you cannot detract, you cannot change. V'chol ha'meshanim mimatbea shetavu chachamim brachot eino ela toeh. And if you do that, you've made a mistake. And the Rambam says in the next halacha, "V'im shina min ha'matbea hoil v'yizkir askara u'malchut v'inyan ha'bracha afilu beloshon chol yatsa." However, says the Rambam, if you've changed the language, but you've retained the structure, you're yotze. So he's paskening like Rabbi Yossi or like Rabbi Meir. So let's understand that the Rambam is paskening like Rabbi Meir and explaining that Rabbi Meir doesn't hold that there isn't such a principle as kol ha'meshaneh mimatbea shetavu chachamim. We know that Rabbi Meir does hold of it. We see that in our Gemara in Gittin. What the Rambam is explaining, that Rabbi Meir says that in brachot, what Rabbi Meir is worried about in the coinage, in the design, is the structural design. Don't change the structure. If you're using English instead of Hebrew, but you've kept the structure, it's okay. But don't change the structure. And that's why when it comes to Hilchos Kriya Shema, the Rambam says, "Klal shedavar ha'mashanim mimatbea shetavu chachamim bevachot harei ze to'eh v'chozer mevarech kematbea." If you've changed the structure, so here he's using the lashon. People have difficulty between this Rambam and the earlier Rambam. The Vilna Gaon even says, the Mishnah Berurah brings the Vilna Gaon is saying that the Rambam changed his mind. By the time he got to Hilchos Kriya Shema, he actually changed his mind. These two Rambams are not reconcilable, says the Vilna Gaon. Others don't learn that way. And the way we're suggesting is it's not necessary to learn that way, because here the Rambam is talking about changing wording. If you change the wording, that isn't going to work at all, because if you change the structure, that's a problem. If you change the language, but you've still retained the structure, it would be okay. And we see that in the Rashbo. That doesn't mean that's how the Rambam holds, but I'm suggesting that that's the same school of thought. The wording isn't what counts, the structure is what counts, says the Rashbo. So in brachot, it's about structure. However, when it comes to the Gittin, we see that Rabbi Meir holds it's about wording. You just leave out the mention of the government. You put a date in according to the Hebrew date, and you don't put how many years it is for the reign of the particular king. There's no mention of the king, that's a problem. So that's one little bureaucratic detail that you've left out of the get. And Rabbi Meir then invokes the idea of kol ha'mashaneh mimatbea shetavu chachamim begittin. That you've changed what the chachamim decreed in Gittin. If you do that, that disqualifies the get. Why in Gittin are we so strict, and in Hilchot Brachot we take it a little bit lighter? As long as the structure is in place, it's okay. Here in the get, the structure's in place. It's got all the primary requirements. It's even got the date. It's just got the date according to one system and not according to the system of the current government. Why would that be so serious? And in understanding this, we'll understand why this idea of you don't mess around with the design of the Chachomim. The truth is, you don't mess around with the design of any artist, of any creator of an object. If you take a Rembrandt and you make a little change on the Rembrandt, it's no longer a Rembrandt. You've messed up with the design. It's no longer a Rembrandt. You've changed it. In the design is the intention of the creator, and to mess with the intention is problematic. Now again, there are different levels of design. Sometimes you're looking at an engineering design, it's structural design. When it comes to the brachot, the Chazal want you to be personal. They want you to feel the bracha. They don't want it just to be a formula. However, it must be structured the way, because in the structure you've got the perfect bracha. But if the actual wording, you're using your own words that you understand and that are meaningful to you, there isn't such a problem. When it comes to Gittin, even the wording has to be right. Why? Why is the wording so important in the get? we take the Tosfos and learn Tosfos carefully. There's an amazing idea. It says Tosfos, "Bipnei matiknu malchut begitin ve'im toma ba'amrina b'perek kama demasechet avodah zarah v'gola in monim el malchut Yavan bilvad." We have in Gemara Avodah Zarah that in the Gola, in other countries, we only use the Greek date. If you're in Babylon, you don't have to use the Babylonian date. If you're in Rome, you don't have to use the Roman date. The only date that we use is the Greek date. Alma lo chayshinan lishlom malchut. So aren't we worried the Babylonian government will say they don't recognize our government? That the Roman government will say they don't recognize our government? You see, no, it's only the Greeks that we're worried about. Lo chayshinan lishlom malchut. And it's not even necessarily that we're worried about it. It's just we use the Greek date and we're not worried. Lo chayshinan lishlom malchut. In other documents, we're not afraid. We're not worried about the document leading to conflict with the government. The dafke begitin yesh lachush lishlom malchut. You're right, in other documents it doesn't matter. But in Gittin you do, shemakpidim, because they are specific. They care about the way we write our Gittin. Shu davar gadol, because this is a major issue, shemafridim ish mishto. This is more than just commercial documents. You're separating a man and a woman. And there are two things that are interesting in Tosfos. Since when would the government be more worried about divorce than about commercial transactions? You're buying 10 blocks of New York City. There we don't care about husband and wife in some little village that we're worried about. It doesn't seem to make sense that that's what they would be worried about. And secondly, says Tosfos, the dafke begitin yesh lachush lishlom malchut. In Gittin, we're concerned about shlom malchut. In other documents, that implies we're not concerned about shlom malchut. It's not that the malchut isn't concerned. So here's how I would suggest we might want to read the Tosfos. That dafke begittin, we should worry about whether the government gets upset. If I'm buying a building in New York, I don't care if the government gets upset. What's the big deal? But when it comes to Gittin, I do care if the government gets upset. Why? Because this is a dover godel shemafridim ish meishto. Because what am I doing with a get? I'm separating a man and his wife. And that's a dover godel. And we're doing it, the reason for a get, we learned just a few days ago that there is, in a get, there's also a gift. That the reason one separates a man and his wife is to create peace, not to create conflict. The reason for the get is because there was conflict. So just as a kiddushin brings two people together in peace, sometimes in order to keep the peace, there's got to be a get, because they can't live together in one confined area in one relationship. So the get actually unlocks peace. So we don't want the get to be, from a cosmic perspective, be a document that causes conflict in society. That's not the idea of a get. It's mafridim ben ish liishto, that's bad enough. Let's do it in the most peaceful way possible, that there's nothing in the wording of the get that can cause societal conflict, other than what we're actually doing with the get itself. We must worry about shlom malchut. It's not that they don't care in other documents. They care in all documents, but we don't care. No, we'll explain it, not a big deal. But when it comes to Gittin, we don't want that conflict. Shemakpidim, because Chazal are makpid. Chazal cares. The fishu davar gadol, it's a big thing for us. For us, a divorce document is a much bigger thing than buying 10 blocks of New York City. To one husband and wife getting divorced, that's a much more serious thing, something with much more cosmic impact than transactions. And the shemafridim ish meishto, this is an important thing. And so we see how much meaning there is in the design of Chazal. That when Chazal design, it's not just a bureaucratic formula that you've got to observe. Whether it's brachot you're talking about, or it's Gittin you're talking about. When the rabbis design an idea, when the rabbis design a practice, when the rabbis design a formula, it's done with deep Kabbalistic awareness, with deep human awareness, with deep spiritual awareness. It takes into account everything in the Bria. This is not just how to manage a bureaucratic detail, how to write a get, how to write a document, how to date a document. This is something much, much bigger than that. And that when it comes to a get, which separates between a man and a woman, Chazal were meticulous that although in other documents we don't care that much about Shalom Malchut, here we do. So when Rabbi Yossi says, in the Gemara Brachos, he says, we don't care so much. As long as the structure is observed, that's okay. Because in Brachot, that's all the Chachamim required. They wanted you to use your personal feeling for the bracha, but a cosmic structure for the bracha. When it comes to Gittin, there's beauty even in the writing of the get, even in something as seemingly trivial as the date, There's beauty and aesthetics in that as well. To write the date in a way that doesn't bring conflict, so that the get itself is designed in order to create higher levels of peace, not to introduce conflict into the world.